to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's George. I'm Head of Support Services at Music Support, and I've been there for about 4 years. I'll let the others introduce themselves when the time comes. But yeah, thank you for joining. We're going to be talking about some of our family and friends services today, in particular the Ripple Effect, which is a workshop that's been developed. The reason we developed the family and friends services is because we realised that actually a quarter of our calls and people reaching out to music support were coming from family and friends, loved ones, colleagues, of those affected by addiction, substance use and mental health challenges. Calling up to ask us, how can I better support the individual and how can I support myself? Because obviously addiction doesn't just affect the individual, but it affects the close network that surrounds them, and the impact is absolutely huge. So we thought, right, we've got to do something about this. Nobody else in the industry is doing this, so we need to do something. And thanks to the Christopher Meredith Foundation. So the Christopher Meredith Foundation fund these family and friends services and other support services that we offer. Just a little bit about the Christopher Meredith Foundation. So they were founded in 2021 to honour the memory of Christopher, an agent and festival director and much loved member of the music circuit. And now we have these amazing funds. We're also, so I'm going to go through some slides with you to talk about the Ripple Effect, which is a workshop that we've developed. It's a 4-hour workshop, which is online, happens about 4 times a year, and teaches you how to support a loved one, but also how to support yourself. So we'll go through that with my colleague Owen, and also after that we're joined by Nick, who you can see probably here. Nick is an artist, a songwriter and a producer from London, and he's going to be talking about some of his own experiences with addiction, but also supporting somebody else in the music industry with their challenges as well. So if you've got any questions, then please put them in the chat box, and Lynn will send them over to us and we can hopefully answer them at the end of our discussion. Great, so I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, and for anyone that doesn't know who Music Support are, I'm sure you do, but we were founded in 2016 by people from the music industry, and we are for everyone in the music industry. So whether you're a lighting technician, an artist, a manager, we're for everybody, and we support people with addiction, substance use and co-occurring mental health challenges. We've got loads of different services. So if you want to look at more of what we do, we're at musicsupport.org, and we have a helpline as well. And Lynn, if you could put the helpline in the, brilliant, thank you. Okay, right. Okay, so the Ripple Effect. So as I've said, it's a 4-hour workshop. We did one in September. We've got another one in December. I think we've got a few places left for anyone that wants to join it. So if you are supporting a loved one, family, friend, colleague with addiction and co-occurring mental health challenges, then this workshop's for you. There's only about 12 people on the workshop, so it's really intimate, and it will help you to understand more about addiction itself, but also how to support the person struggling, but yourself as well in the long run. Okay, slide. I've explained a bit about why we developed the workshop, because we're having lots of people that are calling us, and we now have the services to provide to family and friends. Yeah, I think that's probably about everything. Or just to say that, addiction, it's not just about alcohol and substance use. It can be any form of harmful behaviour. So it could be, sex addiction. It could be disordered eating. There are lots of forms of addiction that we don't think about, and music support can support anyone with all of those as well. I thought it was really important to put a definition of addiction here, because not everybody really knows what addiction is, and it is a chronic disease and it isn't a choice. So I'm just going to read the definition of addiction. So addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experiences. People with addiction use substances or engage in behaviours that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. Okay. Owen, do you want to talk about the impact of addiction and not just on the individual, but also on the family and friends around them?
Yes, so there's a few things listed here. So, addiction can impact relationship breakdowns. It can be incredibly hard to support someone with addiction. And I think that we, music support, do look at addiction as a family disease. So it doesn't just impact the individual, but those who are around. And more often than not, and I'll speak a bit more on it later, that it can be a problem in the family system. And the way we look at families, it's not just the family you're born into, it can be the family you choose, it can be the bandmates you have, the people you work around as well. There's a lot of stigma towards addiction as well, which can be difficult because as the stigma offers the individual shame, the individual is already experiencing shame, which will feed into the addiction, even more so. Isolation can be quite a big part of addiction as well. So it was George that used the example one time that I thought was very good, but to view the addiction as like a devil on the shoulder, and that devil wants to kind of stay there. So it'll do whatever it can to manipulate the individual to stay with them. And a part of the isolation is if we there's a lot of secretive behaviors with addiction. And that's a way of that devil trying to stay on the shoulder. It can cause stress and anxiety. It can cause trauma both to the individual and to those around. The situations that people can get in if they're intoxicated or, as George said, if there was sex addiction or disordered eating and things, they can be predisposed to becoming traumatized through the situations that addiction can put them in. There can be a huge financial impact, which we've seen quite a bit of this year as well. And again, that doesn't just impact the individual, but their family. And as the addiction does want to remain secret, and it can be quite an expensive uh, disease to have, especially with alcohol or drugs like cocaine. Um, as that's remaining secret, they're just spending the money, and can get into quite a bit of financial problems. It can cause mental health problems and physical health problems, which is again what we try to support with as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Owen. And I think it's also important to point out codependent relationships with the impact of addiction. So, a codependent relationship is a dysfunctional relationship where one person assumes the role of the caregiver, sacrificing their own needs and well-being for the sake of the other. So, a lot of the time with someone's addiction, there are two people involved in the addiction, and the other person becomes the enabler. So, you might have, for example, a mother and a daughter, let's say, and the daughter has the addiction, and the mother desperately, desperately wants the daughter to be okay. But part of this relationship, the mother might be lying for the daughter. She might be financing the daughter's addiction habit to make her feel better. And actually, ultimately, what she's doing is negatively impacting the daughter's addiction problems by providing more secrecy and enabling the daughter's addiction to continue. And with codependent relationships, the person that is in the role of rescuer and the addicted individual is the victim, the rescuer thinks that they're doing everything possible to help them. And they're providing this love and support, but actually it's a really horrible dysfunctional relationship to be in. A lot of the time, the rescuer person, which Owen will talk about later in the drama triangle, they've come from some kind of background, potentially in childhood, where that role has been developed earlier in life. So they might have looked after a parent struggling with maybe their own addiction problems, and that role has been established earlier in life, and they take it into adult life. And often people that form codependent relationships unconsciously seek out people that they can rescue because it gives them a sense of purpose. A lot of the time, when the addicted individual gets better, the other person can feel helpless and abandoned because their role is no longer functional anymore. They don't have a role anymore. So a lot of the time, you know, when we're talking to family members and friends, they're over the moon that the person with the addiction issue has got better, but actually they're feeling a sense of loss and grief that their role has disappeared. And it's like, well, you know, what about me? So it's actually finding how we can support them in that transition as well. Owen, do you want to look at this one as well?
Yeah, so understanding addiction, we believe in change through education, bringing more awareness and understanding of addiction and recovery. And this will help participants navigate this difficult time and be able to provide support for the person they care about. So music support we're big into the belief that prevention is better than the cure. And we offer training in mental health first aid, we offer training in addiction and recovery, and the new workshop, which is in the link in the chat at the moment for this Friday, there's an event on, but that is family and friends, and it's a psychoeducational workshop, so it can go through things like boundaries, how to support yourself while supporting another. And give you kind of a bit more education and some tools in how to navigate a situation that's complex, like supporting another with mental health challenges or addiction challenges.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to understand about addiction is, especially in the music industry, that it's not just an individual problem. I think we need to be disruptors in this field in terms of normalizing addiction, because, you know, for far too long, mental health is getting somewhere now, understanding, you know, the challenges of mental health issues, but addiction, there's still this stigma attached, and there's still this kind of like the show must go on, you know. So what, he's drinking 7 days a week and, you know, drinking a bottle of whiskey before he goes on stage, get him on stage, you know, get her on stage. And actually this is a really big problem, and we need to, you know, not everybody develops an addiction problem. There are lots of people in this world who could pick up a drink, take drugs and put them down again. Addiction is a disease, and it's not, as I said, it's not a choice. So we need to help people to stop drink and drugs and everything else becoming normalized, especially within the music industry, so that these people that are struggling can come forward and there isn't so much stigma attached. Yeah, the cycle of change. So I don't know if anyone's heard about this, but it's a psychological framework. So it helps us to understand the stages of change that we all go through when we're trying to change something about our behaviour, and this is particularly relevant with addiction. So most people that are within addiction or trying to change will go through this cycle. The cycle isn't linear. You might spend a year in one stage and then quickly move to the other, or you might go backwards and forwards. But you do go through these processes. And it's really good as somebody supporting an individual if you can understand where they're at in this cycle, because it will help you to better support them in that stage. So just quickly, pre-contemplation. So that is a difficult stage to support somebody, because this stage is the person's like, I don't have a problem. There's nothing wrong with me. The problem is you. Like, I'm fine. So this is when they're not really in that cycle of change. Contemplation is when they're kind of like, okay, so maybe something is wrong. Maybe there's something I need to do about this. I'm not feeling great a lot of the time. My drinking, whatever, my drug taking is probably out of control. They're still using, but there is that thought of potentially getting better. The next bit is preparation. So this is a really good stage to help someone in their recovery. So this is the thing, and a lot of the time when people are in the preparation stage, they're still using, right? So they're still dysfunctional. So if you can help them to, you know, look at information about how to get better, you know, whether it be detox, whether it be residential rehab, whether it be attending AA meetings, NA meetings, whether it be doing CBT sessions or smart recovery. There are lots of different ways to get into treatment. But if you can help them and support them in this stage, this is really, really important. Action is the treatment stage really, is when you're going to meetings and you've actually stopped using, stopped acting out in those behaviours that are harmful. And again, this is a really good place to encourage people to remain in treatment, because a lot of the time people get into treatment and, as Owen said, they have this devil on their shoulder saying, no, you're not, you're fine, come back. And actually they just need to be continually supported. Maintenance is where, you know, you're out of treatment and you're doing well, and you're either attending meetings and you think everything's fine, and people potentially might loosen off the support a bit because you're recovered, you're great. But this is a really dangerous stage, because when support is drawn away from somebody and they potentially think they're better, this is when triggers can happen, and this is when somebody could pick up a drink again. If that happens, then they'll move into lapse or relapse. Lapse is a bit of a red flag. It's a blip. It's a, you know, I was triggered one day, I took a drink, I've woken up in the morning and I feel absolutely dreadful about it, and I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna get back into maintenance right away. I'm gonna call my sponsor, my family. Relapse is something more significant. It's actually potentially going back to old patterns of behavior for a longer period of time. So it's continuing with those destructive patterns of behavior, but you still can get better. So, you know, part of addiction recovery is relapsing and lapsing, and it happens a lot. So just because someone might relapse or lapse doesn't mean that they're going to spend the rest of their life within addiction. When you're in maintenance, you might also go into long-term change, and this is what we want. We want people to move straight into long-term change and stay recovered forever. And it might be that their recovery looks something like they're just not, they don't have the addictive behavior anymore. They might still drink, but they're not addicted anymore. Or it might be that you're completely sober and you choose a sober lifestyle, and that's an individual choice. And Owen, do you want to go through the drama triangle?
Yes, so this is the drama triangle, which was created by Cartman. And this would be used quite a bit whenever we are trying to give people education in how to navigate a supporting relationship. So a lot of the time, what we'll see is rescuers, and George talked a little bit about codependency and enabling, and I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle when it comes to these relationships. So what I've kind of seen a lot of the time is that if we look at what addiction offers to the individual, it can offer self-medicating, it can offer soothing, um, and that tends to be why it becomes a repeated pattern, why it becomes an addiction, because it actually offers them something helpful. So if we look at why is it difficult to soothe yourself? Why do you need something external to do it? A lot of the time we'll see that these rescuers have been in place long before an addiction has been in place. And what that can look like is whenever you're growing up with a parent that offers maybe too much love, um, it's a discomfort with seeing the child in pain. And if the child is feeling pain, mom or dad wants to take that away from the child. Now, whenever that child grows up and goes out into the big bad world, they've never learned how to tolerate challenging feelings, or regulate or soothe those challenging feelings. And what they'll do then is they'll reach for something to do it for them, like substances, like disordered eating, like sex. So that can be a lot of the time where addiction challenges come from. So what we'll see is whenever we start to work with the family and friends is that it is more of a systemic problem. So there's roles within the family that feed the addiction as well. So that's what the rescuer would do. Now, an analogy I would always use for the rescuer is whenever you're teaching a child to ride a bike, if you keep your hands on that child's steering wheel the entire way, will they ever learn? They won't. So the way we need to teach that child to ride the bike is to eventually let go, to give them the space. and they might fall and scrape their knee, but it's your job to say, you can do this, you can get back up, I believe in you. But it's facilitating them the space to make mistakes, um, and to learn, to give them the space to sit with those challenging feelings so they can eventually learn how to identify them, tolerate them, and soothe them themselves rather than depending on us. So there can be a lot of grief involved in that relationship, as George was talking about letting go of your purpose in a relationship. Because again, that offers something to the rescuer as well. It shows it's how they're needed and how they're valued in that relationship. So the rescue would be more common of a role that we would work in, and I think it is, a good way to kind of a good analogy in codependency is you're checking your own temperature through someone else. So I need to fix them to regulate myself. So they're like the relationships that feed off each other, and the need to find independence from each other. And then you've got the persecutor as well. So that is someone that can blame the individual, be cruel to the individual. And again, if we look at shame being a lot of the time the motivator, if we look at addiction as there is challenging feelings that come up, I need to soothe them. And that's whenever we reach out for substances or harmful behaviors. The persecutor will provoke those negative feelings in them, in the individual. Um, like that example, if it's all your fault, you could do better, things like that. So it's about setting up boundaries for people like that. Now, a lot of the time as well, you can see the persecutor and the victim attack the rescuer. So if this that saying of if it's not broke, don't fix it. The rescuer's role is always to fix. But a lot of the time, the victim does not want a light shone on their problems, and the persecutor certainly does not want a light shone on their negative behavior. So the rescuer can be a very challenging place to be, and it would be a big part of my role to support people who are in that. Now, we'll all fall into these in different relationships as well. Each relationship is very, very different in our lives. Um, but where we want to get is to recognize the patterns and roles that are provoked whenever we are in a new relationship or whenever we are supporting someone. So the fourth point of the drama triangle is to sit outside of it, and that's called the witness. I recognize where my behavior is being drawn towards. How can that be perceived by the other? What impact can this have? So just to notice and witness what comes up.
Lovely, thanks. Okay.
And then for access and support, so the one of the most challenging things in these relationships is establishing clear boundaries. If you're talking about putting boundaries up with someone that you're supporting, the amount of guilt that can sit with someone can be uh, gut-wrenchingly painful. So trying to put yourself in a position where you can allow yourself those boundaries and understand that those boundaries not only are protecting yourself but protecting the other. That old analogy of you have to put your oxygen mask on first is tried and true. Now we also offer support services. The support services we offer in music support, we don't just offer the workshop, we also offer one-to-one support sessions. And in those, it can be a space for the individual to have their own space to look at their own behaviors and get the support that they need from a therapist. Um, Self-care is incredibly important, and peer support as well. So music support actually offer a peer support group for family and friends, which can be really, really powerful. Um, to be around people that are experiencing similar problems. So it can also create a bit of a network. So if you're struggling, you can reach out to people that are also struggling, and get um, yeah, be around a bit of a community around it, which can be very, very powerful.
Thanks, Owen. And just to talk a bit about stats as well in the music industry around mental health, I don't know if anyone saw, but Skiddle carried out a mental health survey in the last 12 months. And they found, this is in the UK music industry, and they found that 50% of people in the UK music industry had poor mental health because of their job within the music industry. 28% said that their work stress had caused problems with substance use. And that's massive. So that's like over 70, 80,000 people struggling with substance use because of their job within the music industry. So again, this is why we need to be disruptors, and we need to change what's going on at the moment in terms of work stress. Great, okay. So I don't know if we'll do questions now. I think we'll go into a chat with Nick and then maybe questions at the end. Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you. Nick,
Hi.
hello. Hi. So thank you for joining us. So my first question to you is really, when did you first notice that you had addiction challenges? So when did you first notice that things were out of control for you?
I think from when I really started drinking, I knew that I drank differently than other people. But I was pretty young at the time. I was probably about 15, 16. And when you're that young, like all your friends are kind of just getting into it a bit as well. You're not really sure um how much of it is going to be like a problem for you later in life. A lot of people are just kind of exploring drinking substances. But from when I started drinking to when I quit drinking, 15 years later, it was all always pretty chaotic and always pretty different. It was always fairly destructive, but the thing was is it slowly progressed over time. Um, I think I really started to notice that it was out of control when I started to try and put limitations on it. Like when I was in my early 30s, I'm still kind of in my early 30s, but when I quit drinking, I right beforehand, I started to try and limit myself and would do like periods of abstinence and be like, okay, I'm only gonna have 2 drinks, or like I'm not gonna do drugs, or I'm not gonna do this. And I noticed pretty quickly that I couldn't hold myself to that. Um, and then the more that I tried, it was interesting because it felt like the more that I tried to control it at that point, the less control I really started to have over it. And yeah, I think it just started to really devolve quickly at that point later in life. It was like a lot of my drinking and using was really similar over the entire time that I did it, but it's just the consequences started to get worse, and I started to really notice it. And then it was just something that I couldn't really ignore anymore. And that's when I decided to get help.
Thank you. And did you find that being a part of the music industry, did you find that it kind of exacerbated your drinking problems? Um,
100%. I mean, my one of my old managers like really encouraged me to want to be out all the time, like be at all the parties, be partying with everyone, be out the latest, party the hardest. And it was enabling behavior. It wasn't he didn't necessarily like mean anything bad by it, but honestly, he didn't it's because it's so ingrained in the music industry, and it's been this kind of the idea of like rock stars, male or female, whatever it is, this like hard partying lifestyle, um, has been considered quote unquote like rock and roll for so long, that I'm really glad to see that there is this shift away from it, where I think there's a lot of public support for those that decide to quit drinking and be sober, which I think it's almost, you know, when you think of rock and roll as like or like music in general as an extreme of partying, it's like you could see, you know, total abstinence sobriety is like taking it the other direction, which in a way is just like way more courageous. And you know, um but yeah, I mean the music industry is it's a nightlife industry. You know, it's like a lot of it happens after 7 p.m., you know, and it's just it happens at clubs. It's like drinking's a part of that. And then, you know, people use it to for confidence to get on stage. People are drinking, you know, at the bars and at the venues. It's like it's pretty hard to escape it. So it becomes an interesting question of how do you navigate it and
Mm.
still feel comfortable in the industry, you know.
Yeah. And certainly I think I've spoken to a lot of artists, you know, like yourself, who, you know, they need that boost to get on stage, but then and then they're in front of thousands and thousands of people and they've got this adrenaline rush, and then coming off stage and they're kind of dumped in a hotel room, you know, and it's like isolated then.
Hmm.
And it's like, so coming from that extreme high to extreme low must be such a difficult process of emotions to deal with, and incredibly lonely as well. And that goes for crew, not just artists, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Was there anyone who you potentially developed a codependent relationship with while you were struggling? And if you did, how did that negatively impact you? And also, how did it impact them?
I think a lot through my addiction and drinking, most relationships that I developed had a sense of like codependency, especially if they were really close. Um, Romantic relationships, for instance, you know, people that I would be with that, you know, really loved me and I loved them, but I also had this love for substance abuse and drinking. And like they didn't want to get in between me and that. And so in a sense, they would enable that, which would just kind of could potentially just make things spiral a bit. You know, I had relationships where the person that I was with had an equal love of substance and drinking that I did. So we had this kind of almost trauma bond over drinking and using together. And the real issue is like you're never present. So it's hard to like it's hard to sometimes even separate the drugs and drinking from the relationship at that point. I've had friendships, you know, that were in a similar case where we were both drinking and using together, which become toxic pretty quickly. And then also friendships where people, like close friends that didn't drink or drank a bit but didn't use, really wanted to help me, but I would push them away from because of my addictions. Um, One of my last relationships, the person really, really wanted to help me, but I felt smothered by it, and I felt like further away from what I ultimately wanted, which was, you know, drinking and using, and the kind of pressure that they put on me getting better, or like going back to that diagram, kind of like um, who is the red one? I'm forget the name of it, but you know, they were like, it's your kind of your fault, playing the victim, kind of putting a lot of pressure on me, which made me draw back, you know. Um, so yeah, I mean, there was I think when drugs and when alcohol and substances are involved, a lot of relationships become codependent in this triangle of, you know, of the substance itself as well,
Yeah.
especially for people close to the addict.
I think you were talking about the persecutor. So
Yeah,
the
that was it.
persecutor,
Yeah, the
yeah,
persecutor.
yeah. the rescuer and the victim. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it, or was there anything in particular that made you realize, right, get into the contemplation stage and go, gosh, like I need to do something about this? Because I think for some people there is that one event that makes them think I got to change, and for other people it's nothing, it just happens.
It was a lot of things. I think primarily the one thing that caused it was fear. I was just really scared. I was afraid to keep drinking. I was afraid to stop drinking. Um, and I just made promises to myself that I couldn't keep. I'd made promises to other people I couldn't keep. Um, and it was just like this pattern of behavior that I couldn't escape. So I guess effectively it would just be what was my rock bottom with it, really, where I needed to find help and I wanted to find help at that point. Um, and that's the hard part, is that like a lot of time if people honestly don't want help, they're not going to find it. Um, you kind of, I think, I mean, and I can only speak from my own experience, but from an addict's point of view, um, you kind of need to get to the point where you surrender, you know. Um, and it's different for everyone, you know. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was a long time, and it took a long time for me to get there, but
Yeah.
eventually, yeah.
And did you find that with the cycle of change that we talked about, did you find that you were kind of going from one to the other and back around and jumping from place to place? Or was it, you kind of got into recovery very quickly?
I think I was in a process of pre-contemplation and contemplation for quite a while.
Yeah.
I tried a lot of different kind of things. Tried a lot to, I was doing therapy. I tried to quit only doing certain drugs. I tried to limit my drinking. I basically was just like holding on really tight to the idea that I could drink and use like a normal person, whatever that meant, and that went through periods of abstinence where I would take months off and then come back to find out that it was just worse. And so it was like, it was kind of a lot of that cycling around those first few stages until I'd say I hit my rock bottom and finally decided to like truly make a change.
Yeah. Thank you. And in terms of how you got better, if you don't mind just touching on what kind of treatment you went into, that would be really helpful, I'm sure, for people listening.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from my experience, of course, and
Sure.
there's a ton of different ways to get sober. I had a friend that was in a 12-step program, and I had seen him like visibly, tangibly, he was just, I could see him have gotten better. And when I was really struggling, I asked him for help. And he brought me to a 12-step meeting. And so I think I think any sort of meeting is really important because you find like a tribe, you find like a community um, of people who uh, can can share the struggles, who are going through similar things. And I think very quickly you find out that um, actually helping other people is a really, really important way of staying sober. Um, because ultimately addiction it's a very selfish thing. Um, and it's hard to see that at the time because you are in addiction. But when you start helping other people, you realize that that can really help you stay sober.
Absolutely. Thank you. And like you said, there are lots of different ways that that people can get into recovery. It doesn't just have to be 12-step. I know that some people find 12-step difficult. So there are lots of other ways. So just because one thing didn't work for you doesn't mean that something else can't. So that's really important as well to say.
Definitely.
What was it like? Because I know that you've experienced supporting other people with addiction challenges within the music industry. What was that like for you being the loved one in that situation?
For me, helping other people that had addiction issues,
Yeah,
I get again because I can only speak from the experience of already going through recovery itself.
yeah,
So for me to help other people was like gentle guidance. I think that, you can't, you don't want to risk necessarily like pushing someone away, you know. And like I was saying before, you don't really know it in active addiction, but you kind of need to get there on your own. Um, and so it's, you know, I I've been a resource to people to when, they need help and they've asked for help. Um, I can provide it and provide guidance and advice without telling them what they should do, because I think, you know, that's, and I experienced it myself, is like when someone feels like they're putting pressure on you, especially when you have like a strong addiction present, and probably similar to my case, it's like you're scared to stop or you can't stop. Someone putting pressure on you to stop makes you withdraw from that person pretty easily. Um, so it's a really delicate balance of guidance. You know, I try and use principles of just how I was living my life and being like, look, I still go play shows. I like do all the stuff, same stuff. I still go to the pub. I still do all the same stuff that I was doing. You know, I do it. I do it in a different way now, and showing them that that's possible. I know that it's not always going to be coming from someone who's in recovery themselves. So, I mean, I think that this is like what you guys do with the ripple effect, and even, music supports resources and whatnot are an important thing to kind of guide someone towards. Because a lot of the times when you bring up potentially the fact that someone might have a problem, they could very well get super defensive about it because it fills them with fear. And it's the fear of looking at the actual problem, which is what people avoid. And so yeah, it's a really delicate balance, and the way that I've done it is just from trying to guide as an example, really.
thank you. I think there's that also that thing with someone experiencing addiction challenges is like letting go. It's like letting go of my old life and who do I become after this. I know that when we support people into treatment, it's like, but I'm scared of who the other person is going to be on the other side. Like, am I going to be interesting anymore? Am I going to, it's that whole thing of, well, I don't know who I am without this. So I
Mhm.
think that's really scary as well, like evolving into something else. And not, well, 100% of the time you evolve into something a lot better. So I can say that as well.
A lot of people
Um,
fear becoming boring.
yeah,
Um, and there's like a kind of irony there, because when you look, I mean, at least when I've been able to look back on my patterns of behavior, like the drinking and using was really the boring part of it. Um, Whereas like what the life that you can live on the other side is what is new and exciting. If that, because the drinking and using is the boring, repetitive stuff, the same patterns of behavior over and over. The definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, you know. Whereas on the other side, that's where life can get exciting, is when you get rid of that stuff.
Yeah. And the final question is just a bit of closing advice for anyone that might be listening or watching the recording back. What would you say to someone supporting someone right now with addiction challenges? Is there any kind of words of advice that you could give them?
Be patient, is a big one. Try and be honest without judgment, which is really hard one, because it's hard to not become really emotional when it's someone that's really close to you. I think a big one too is to remember that it's not your fault. I think a lot of people try and they take on this role of caregiver, or want to help the other person, and if they feel like they're failing, they feel like it's their fault. And that's not the case. It really comes down to the addict and the one, for them to want to get better. And it's like, you can do what you can to help, and you should try and help other people, but you have to remember that it's not your fault, because I think a lot of people can realize, can feel like it is, and that's an important thing to hold on to.
Thanks, Nick. That's been very, very generous of you to share all of that with us. I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you. So I think we're going to go to some questions now, if there is any. Let's have a look.
I can, excuse me, I can just ask mine. I've put quite a long one in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great.
Great, thank you. And those statistics from Skiddle are pretty stark, aren't they?
Yeah.
And we attended a meeting in Parliament about 10 days ago now, something like that. There was a meeting of the All Party Music Group, and one of the issues being discussed was the support that is available, in particular for this discussion, to artists. And it was really as a consequence of Liam Payne's sad, tragic passing. And one of the sort of fundamental questions the group MPs were particularly keen to understand was, who has the duty of care? Their immediate thought was, oh, well, the manager has the duty of care, but actually then representatives from managers were saying, well, no, actually we're employees. We can't, in some circumstances, if we try to say something, we'll just lose our jobs. And I know there are shifting power dynamics throughout the music industry, but I'd appreciate your thought on, is there a single duty of care, or is it a collective duty of care? How do we best approach this?
Yeah, I mean, I can try and answer this as best as possible from my own point of view, and that is that it's a collective. We can't just blame one part of the music industry for the problem. This needs to be a industry change, and that starts with, we were talking the other day about developing potentially a code of practice or something, that the whole industry signs up to and says, we're going to create, like for example, we were talking about festivals and how there are no breaks, especially for crew. How can you be somebody working 20-hour shifts and not get a break and then not be stressed? How can you not develop some kind of well-being problems? So, there has to be a collective change. Who is responsible for integrating breaks? Like who is responsible for providing in venues like sober areas for people that don't drink, sober fridges. So I think the industry has to come together, and it has to be a wider conversation, and there's lots of different topics that need to be discussed. I don't know, Norman or Owen or Lynn, if you have got any other comments on that. But I think definitely music support is trying to develop ways that we can change as a industry-wide being. Yeah.
I think that's why we're so keen to work with you at Live, because we do bring the industry together. And Gabby, whether you want to mention some of the live workforce work that we're doing there, and maybe follow-ups to the freelancer survey, which all sort of feed into this, because it's about how we sort of better organize ourselves as an industry to not place so much pressure onto individuals, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things we're doing this year, I mean, every year we produce an event called the Live Awards, which is our main fundraiser, which is actually next Wednesday, a week today, gosh. And this year we've made a real big effort to make sure that people who don't drink feel like they have an inclusive experience at the event. So we've removed a quarter of our drinks budget and replaced it with non-alcoholic alternatives, but not just orange juice, Diet Cokes. It's like we have non-alcoholic wines, we have non-alcoholic beers, we have non-alcoholic spritzers. And so everyone has exactly this same experience, whether you drink or you don't. And we did that because we go to a lot of other events like this across the year, and people who decide to not drink have to pay £15 for an elderflower, and it's so uninclusive and unfair, and it puts them on the spot, and maybe that would make them take the alcoholic option instead, and you don't know what they're going through, or it might be a religious reason, or there's so many other things. So I think that was our big step this year, to kind of move the dial a little bit in that sense, and we've had a really great reception to that. But yeah, also I was on tour this year, and in the tour bus toilet there was a music support card already placed there by the driver, and it was it was an 11-person crew including the artist, and there was 9 females and 2 males. So, and that made a really safe experience for the female artist. Then creates better times on the bus. People talked about their emotions, there were tears, everyone looked after each other in a really safe way. And I think those kind of changes of making people feel safe, included in all aspects, helps with people going and grabbing a drink when they're stressed. Those types of situations, I think there's good movement, but there just needs to be more of it.
Absolutely, and I think that's an amazing steps towards inclusivity as well. It's other things. It's like making sure that there's a mental health trained person on tour, so if someone does have well-being or mental health issues, they can be calmed down by somebody that's had training, or somebody that is sober on tour that can help somebody in recovery that might be struggling. There are lots of ways that we can make the music industry more inclusive, and not just about alcohol, drugs. And again, like, I have to say that music support, we're not about you can't drink, you can't do this, you can't do that. We're just saying that there are alternatives to that. So yeah, I don't know if there was anyone that wanted to add to that. I'm sure everyone's got lots of experiences of similar things here.
Is that everyone's questions? I'm just checking the chat. I think that's all the questions in the chat.
I think on that freelancer point, the research that Gabby led earlier in the year identified that only 5% of freelancers actually have a contract in the music industry. So your point about who's scheduling the breaks for the festival crews, well, actually, there's a fundamental piece of work that we need to do there, and that we're taking forward in the early stages of those discussions. But it'd be great to bring you into them about how do we get a contract in place, and what does that contract incorporate? Because I think that would be hugely valuable. Can I just also say, Nick, thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I've found you on Spotify, so I'm going to check your music out.
Thanks,
after this, but it was really much appreciated. Thanks.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
If that's everything from your side, George, I'll just do some closing comments if that's.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and listening. And yeah, if you want to know anything more about us or our services, you can email me or Lynn or Owen. We can provide you with email addresses and things like that. And if you know anyone that's struggling, just point them in our direction.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Lynn, for pulling everyone together. George, Owen, and Nick, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today. And yeah, all your time and efforts for bringing this to life and sharing it with us at Live Talks. So I hope you all have a very lovely December and Christmas break if you do get one. And we'll see you all in the new year, hopefully.
Many thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you.